Good evening. My name is Jennifer Downing. I'm the Executive Director of the New Bedford Ocean Cluster. For those of you who are not aware, the New Bedford Ocean Cluster is a nonprofit marine industry association that was created in 2021 to drive business development, facilitate industry connections and partnerships, and to promote innovation and entrepreneurship across the city's maritime economy. On behalf of the delegation of the European Union of the United States, it is my honor to welcome you to this evening's program. It's been a pleasure to work alongside our embassy colleagues, our new embassy colleagues, I should say, out of DC, on this delegation's visit to New Bedford and to organize this evening's panel discussion. Later, you will hear directly from industry leaders on the important topic of U.S. offshore wind industry development and strategies for transatlantic cooperation to drive industry growth. But first, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the elected officials who have registered for this evening. I'm not sure if they're actually in the room, but I still want to acknowledge them and for their continued support of the economic growth of this city, and also in particular their advocacy to ensure the continued advancement of our maritime economy. Representative Tony Cabral and Representative Chris Hendricks. We're also honored to have Mayor Jon Mitchell with us this evening. The city of New Bedford, under the mayor's leadership, has worked for well over a decade to leverage our close ties to the ocean and maritime strengths to regenerate our economy and lead in offshore wind. With determination and focus, the city and port have strengthened their capacity to cultivate new business growth and investment. And today, the port is the home of the nation's first marshaling terminal for commercial-scale offshore wind, and is the primary staging base for the Vineyard Wind 1 project. And we know we are well-positioned to support future projects throughout various stages of project development and operations. First elected in 2011, Mayor Mitchell is New Bedford's 38th mayor, and he has been decisively reelected 5 times. Prior to running for office, Jon was an assistant United States attorney in Boston, having previously served as a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., in the Attorney General's Honors Program. The product of local public schools and the son of public school teachers, Jon graduated from Harvard College and the George Washington Law School. He also served 6 years in the Army National Guard and is a member of the Board of Trustees of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Jon has sought to reestablish New Bedford as one of the leading cities in the Northeast. Under his leadership, the city has achieved the highest bond rating and the highest high school graduation rate in its history. He's helped to lower crime by over 50% and has secured hundreds of millions of dollars in new port investments. So without delay, it is my pleasure to invite Mayor Jon Mitchell to the podium to say a few words to begin our program tonight. Mayor?
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jen, for that introduction. Welcome to New Bedford, everyone. I'll be real brief. I know the party continues after the panel discussion, but I just wanted to come on up and say a few words and welcome, especially our delegation from the EU. We were talking earlier about how it may be tempting for folks, especially the office in Washington, to assume that the rest of America is just like DC, but I hope you know by now it isn't. Thank you very much. And here in New Bedford, we pride ourselves of being a place where, unlike DC, a lot actually gets done. And I hope you had a chance to see some of the evidence of that today. But I wanted to thank Jen for all of her work and pulling everybody together so skillfully. And I know that it was an engaging day for all of you here, and hopefully we can conclude it just as well. And I do want to thank the European Union delegation for being here. Too many folks to name, but I know that this was an opportunity. We've met some of you before, and some of you are new to New Bedford, and I hope the experience has been good so far. We have, I stand here today and before a primarily European audience to say thanks for setting an example for us. Offshore wind, America didn't have to invent offshore wind. We didn't have to reinvent the proverbial wheel. We copied the best of what you did over the last decade, or sought to at least, and avoided the mistakes that you made, and daring boldly. We stand here today ready to continue to launch this industry. I've been in office for 12 years now, and early on, I confess I knew pretty much, well, I actually didn't know much about much, and offshore wind was one of those topics about which I was deeply unfamiliar, but we tried very hard to get up to speed on it, because we thought, well, it just made a lot of sense for this city, a city that, as you can tell by being in this room, is nothing if not a seaport. We're proudly the largest commercial fishing port in the United States, and we thought, well, offshore wind, it's pretty windy off of our coast, and so offshore wind makes a lot of sense at the most elemental level, but not few people knew about it, and so, or were familiar with it. So this was, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, Bill, when we took those trips to places like Cuxhaven and Bremerhaven and Esborg, and then later on in the UK to Grimsby and Hull, and then later to Tyne and other places, to really just to take a close look at what would be possible here in an older industrial city in the United States, one like other similarly situated cities that's not part of a major metropolitan area. We've got to hustle to attract capital, and offshore wind seemed to be an opportunity to do just that. And so what we've been endeavoring to do over the last 10 years or so is to reach the point where much of Europe has been upon the maturing of offshore wind, right? A place where heavy industry can be done, right, at the docks, in the factories, and so that's why we spend so much time and energy and political capital in attracting and assembling funds to build out and modernize the Port of New Bedford. We're in the midst of a pipeline now, about a 10-year pipeline, in which we will, by the end of it, have invested, both in public funds and private funds, over $1 billion in new port infrastructure. There's more port infrastructure being built now in New Bedford than there has been when New Bedford was the center of the world's whaling industry. And so we're proud of that, but we know that that's not enough, that we have to continue to grow up the value chain from there, and that's why the work on workforce investment has been, on workforce development has been so important. Laura Douglas from Bristol Community College is here. Where did Laura go? There you are, right there. You're hiding on me. So one of the things that you should know, you got a chance, I think some of you did today, to take a look at what is America's first dedicated offshore wind training center, the National Offshore Wind Institute, right on our waterfront as well, smack dab in the middle of everything. GWO certified, very prepared to offer relevant programs to the industry, and with a number of really established partnerships in place. The MBOC, headed up by Jen, is another facet of our work to facilitate business-to-business contact here in the U.S. and, of course, overseas as well. And that's been a big boon to us. We like it. We are thrilled when we go to conferences in Europe or we host Europeans, and the city, folks who are from or connected to the offshore wind industry, and the first city they have in mind when they think American offshore wind is New Bedford. It's taken us a while to cultivate that recognition, but it is there, and it's there for good reason, because there's substance behind it. And then, of course, what we're working on now with the likes of Lisa Engler and the Mass Clean Energy Center and some number of other research institutions is to develop New Bedford as a place where relevant innovation can occur. We want New Bedford to be seen not just a place where ships dock and the workforce is developed, but a place where or innovation where new breakthroughs are made. And I think that's key. And that's a facet of what we're doing right now that will complement everything else, but is absolutely necessary. And again, it's a reflection of our attempt to be not like any particular European port, but maybe sort of like a composite sketch of one, an amalgamation of several. We would like to be a place where all these things can happen. There are places that will have more marshaling space, more places in the U.S. that have ports in the U.S. that will have more marshaling space, but we'll continue to be an important marshaling port, but we're going to be doing everything else. And so at the end of the day, what we want is folks to say, if you're in the offshore wind business in the U.S., you've got to have a foothold in New Bedford, and that's the objective. When you have that, you have a classic industrial cluster. That's what we're shooting for, and that's how that is at the core of our effort to bring our city back to a place where we can say, yeah, where things are thriving, where opportunity is being created, and where people are living a good life. That is it in a nutshell. And so we look forward not only to this current discussion, but also to continue to work with you and know that as you go back home and you talk to colleagues and you think about the opportunity in the United States, know that New Bedford is a place where people hustle. We don't take things for granted, that we know what we're talking about when it comes to offshore wind, at least compared to a lot of other places in the U.S., and where thought leadership and where a whole lot of relevant economic activity will occur, not just in the next few years, but in the next several decades. So we look forward to doing what we can to make your business successful here if you see fit to come to New Bedford. But more than anything else, I hope you guys have a good time tonight and learn something and make a few new friends. Thanks, everybody.
Giving him this beanie on an 80-degree day. But according to my son who lives in Revere, he may need it by the weekend. So
I'll tell you what.
I also have one for Jennifer for being
I'm going to assume something about Jen's wardrobe, but I don't think either one of us have a cap like this. This will. I'm going to hold on to it for a couple months and just admire it before I actually put it to use. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your welcome, and thanking you. Let me also express the thanks to everyone who has welcomed us here in New Bedford today. It's been a great experience, and I would reassure you that those of us like me who are based in Washington, D.C., only jump at the opportunity to escape the bubble and come and meet people in the real world outside the Beltway. And maybe in that sense, just for a word of explanation for those of you who may be wondering what are a bunch of European diplomats doing in New Bedford, we are all, I think we have about 14 European countries represented here and the European Union. We're here basically under a sort of an EU umbrella, as you can see. Please take a pin when on the way out. As opposed to the national umbrella. And we're here basically because we realize that the world and the United States does not stop at the border of the District of Columbia. And so periodically, every 6 months, we take the opportunity under the guidance of the country which happens to hold the presidency of the European Union at that time to travel the States and come and visit a new environment. So I also have to thank our colleague Gilles and his other colleagues from the Belgian embassy for organizing this trip to Massachusetts for us. Yesterday, we were in Boston and talking about circularity or meeting with a company that's active in the life sciences space, pharmaceuticals, and meeting also with the officials of the Massachusetts state level Office of Trade and Investment. Today, we have spent the day here in New Bedford, and of course, engaging and learning about the work that's going on offshore to develop the offshore wind energy. And tomorrow, we're back in Boston to continue the program. I would say, obviously, this interest in coming here is also because we realize that the We share in Europe something with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because we both have a strong commitment to getting to net zero. Both Massachusetts and the EU have commitments to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Renewable energy is part of that. Wind energy is part of that. Offshore wind energy is part of that. And as you were saying, in Europe, we're perhaps a little further ahead in terms of the chapter where we are on rolling out and developing offshore wind. But we're both going in the same direction. And so being here is also an opportunity to engage with stakeholders and pick up ideas for what's working well, what's not working so well, and look for areas of potential mutual benefit in terms of engagement, business to business or government to government, also in the space in the regulatory space. So being here, the purpose of this conversation, of the panel, is to try and get that conversation going, and we've been able to pull together an excellent panel, which basically brings together the different perspectives of actors who are engaged in developing the Vineyard wind field off the coast. So we have Carrie Hitt, who's from Vineyard. We have Sloan and Bill, who are from Foss and Deme, who are basically installers. And we have that's one. Bill. Oh yeah. Bill. Yeah. And we have Steve, who basically is from the grid side, who basically takes off the energy that's being produced and puts it to good use. So you haven't come here to hear from me. So basically, let me kick it off to the panel, and maybe start with Carrie as from Vineyard in asking basically what would you say is in terms of where you are in terms of the development of the project. What's working well? What are the challenges? And where might you see also avenues for the future in terms of engagement with European companies, European actors who have some experience, maybe some expertise also to bring to the party?
Should I just speak?
Well,
Yeah, probably would be helpful.
Unless you shout.
Yeah. Right. Well, thanks very much, and thanks for having me here. I do work at Vineyard Offshore, which is in a joint venture with Avangrid owning the project, Vineyard Wind 1, and I believe you had a tour this morning of the port. That's great. And I, just by way of explanation, kind of work on a number of different areas. I'm just going to slip this in here because why I'm here today. I have my master's degree in European energy policy, so maybe that's why I got asked to come. But I work across the U.S. And a little bit internationally right now, really putting the pieces together on the policy side for development of offshore wind. And I worked on different resources in the past, but obviously here focused on offshore wind. So. Those are a lot of questions, but maybe I'll just try to answer them quickly, and I know you want to delve in a little bit in more detail. In terms of the project here, which is, as you probably heard today, is the first real project that's been constructed here in the U.S., is interconnected and operational. We are delivering power to the grid, which is pretty amazing in the short amount of time that it feels like a long time to people that I work with, like Rachel Pachter, who's our Chief Development Officer. It's been a number of years, but the fact that power is delivering into the grid right now, and even though the project is still in construction, is very cool. And thank you to the Mayor of New Bedford, Mayor Mitchell. I mean, it's been an amazing relationship, and I think that's sort of where the opportunities are, and what works well is the stakeholder engagement is critical on these issues, on developing these projects. There are technical issues, there are economic development issues, but without key stakeholder engagements with people such as the City of New Bedford, First Nations, tribal nations here in the U.S., the community, generally just the community, the environmental community, the fishing community, honestly, the energy community. So our grid is run by an independent system operator. You have grids in Europe too. That's what I studied. And we have to have a relationship with them that they're going to be ready to accept our power. They can interconnect it from an engineering perspective and from a planning perspective. All of those relationships have been very, very, very critical. And it just lining all aspects of those things up in a timely manner to allow the project to be constructed in a timely manner and interconnect. I can't overstate it, and we can drill down into any one of those aspects. But since we're here in New Bedford, I will stress the stakeholder relationship is critical. Working with the local community, figuring out what you're going to do with the port, figuring out how you're going to get your workforce trained, who can we bring in from the workforce to ensure we have equity and inclusion, what are the other economic development components that can come to the city that actually also benefit the project, right, and make the project happen. Challenges, just quickly. We all know they're numerous, but here in the U.S., it does relate to the complex permitting that we have, the different forums for permitting, so state, local, federal, very difficult. Lining those things up can be a major challenge. Again, I'll focus on electrical interconnection into the grid. Lining that timing up can be a challenge. It takes a long time to be able to figure out the physical aspects of interconnecting and to secure the equipment that you need and get the approval from that independent system operator. That's very challenging. The third piece is just the macro issues that we're all struggling with now in the offshore wind industry on supply chain and things like that. Maybe not so much for our project here. There have been issues with the project here, but just generally that's something that we face. You know, are vessels available when you need them? If that permitting schedule changes a little bit or the interconnection schedule changes a little bit, what do you do? If you have to change your schedule because of weather or because of environmental regulations, which we all accept and acknowledge need to be there, the supply chain can become even more challenging. And we are competing here in New Bedford, in Massachusetts, with all the other activity going on in the world. And so that's a significant challenge. What I would say is working with stakeholders is a challenge, but it's surmountable, and it is what our job is to do to make sure that these complex projects actually happen. And I think I'll leave it at that, and we can talk about solutions later or how we work together, because there's a lot to say there.
Well, yes. I mean, I guess we should maybe turn to Sloan, and I mean, because we were on the boat, as you say, doing the tour, and we certainly saw your tugs pulled up, and we saw the barge being loaded with this very impressive load to go out. I mean, that was going to form the turbine. So we know it's a very technical, challenging business. But I mean, given the demand and the rollout, how do you see the installation process going? And again, is it are there capacity issues? Are there supply chain issues? Or what I mean, is it like workforce issues? What's the solution to make this happen as smoothly as possible?
Well, that's a magic box. I think just stepping back for a second, FOSS has been involved in offshore wind in Massachusetts all the way back to the original Cape May project. And we were involved in that project. It didn't go through. And then FOSS pivoted and looked around at the level of expertise in the U.S. And we went to Europe. And we looked for partners in Europe that had expertise that we could create relationships with so that we could come together and create a more reliable supply chain. And so how do you solve some of the supply chain problems that are worldwide? They're not unique to the Vineyard project. I think you look for reliable partnerships, and we spent years working on our relationship and building the trust and compatibility with DMA. And I'll let Bill talk a little bit more about that. But it didn't happen overnight, but we chose to go and find a subject matter expert and partner with them and come to the U.S. together. And so I think that when we look at some of the supply chain problems, those collaborative partnerships might be the key to getting a little more continuity, a little more reassurance, a little more stability in our projects. I think COVID and some of the global economy came at a really unfortunate time for the U.S. pipeline. And I think that had a lot to do with some of our delays, but I think we've overcome those. The states have stuck by their zero emission goals, and they've stuck by their commitment to offshore wind, and they are rebidding projects. And the pipeline is developing, and it may not be 23, 24, 25, but it's going to be 27, 28, 29, 2030 and on. And how do we create a reliable supply chain now for when the next wave of projects occur? And I think those partnerships with countries in the EU that have that experience, with companies like DIME that have proven that they have a commitment to the US market and haven't abandoned the US market, and have opened up shop here and have formed those collaborative relationships, are really critical to our success.
Excellent.
Well, obviously, if you start talking about positive experiences of transatlantic cooperation, we sort of smile and think, yes, that sounds good, but can we have more, please? And how do we also, from a European perspective? I mean, Bill, what's the experience of working with an American partner? Is it as easy as it could be? I mean, how do you?
It's wicked easy. Because I'm an American. I'm a Bostonian.
How do you navigate the very particular situation that we find here sometimes?
Yeah, Peter, thank you for that, and thank you for your kind words, Sloan. Before I just jump in, I just want to just say thank you to the mayor. 12 years ago when you were elected, I remember we sat down and visited, and I talked to you about offshore wind. You were being humble, by the way. You knew a hell of a lot more about it, and you asked all the key questions, and you asked what is the opportunity? And there was a lot of disbelievers at the time, but you believed. And I think you could watch how he speaks without notes and so precise about what this industry is and what we can be. It's incredibly impressive. So thank you for all your leadership forever. I just want to embarrass one more friend. Professor Kevin Stokesbury is up there. He is also one of the key people here in this community that's actually responsible for offshore wind, where Carries and Foss and DEME are building the Vineyard Wind Project. All those lease areas were basically designated by not only Kevin, but it was his data, his research about where the fisheries are and where they are not that provided really the foundation. And it was his relationship and credibility that allowed us to work with the fishing industry collaboratively to move this industry forward. All right, and then the one other thing to all the diplomats here, not that I'm diplomatic, but I used to work at the U.S. Department of State, so I just wanted to do a shout out to thank you guys and gals all for everything that you have done to really create this kind of knowledge exchange, really, and to create this partnership that we've had with the European industry, community, et cetera, and that knowledge transfer that is coming here to the U.S. I sometimes, some people would say Americans are a bit arrogant. I would say we're maybe a confident species and group, but, and we like to think highly of our ability to lead, but it really has been that head start that the mayor referenced, this 30-year head start that you have had that has allowed us to really leapfrog forward. So, sorry for that little intro, but the relationship, I mean, almost the same as what Sloan had said. We started into this industry early. We started exploring really in 2017 what offshore wind and its emerging place could be. And so my predecessors and others did the groundwork, and we worked closely with Vineyard. We knew that that was kind of the leading project. We aggressively pursued that contract as well as others. And, you know, we're a company that has a 140-year history in Europe. We're based in Belgium, obviously, but really looking. And I think when people think about DEME, we are probably the leading. I don't know if I should be I don't know, arrogant or anything, but I mean, almost 50% of all the projects in the world DEME has had a role in. So they were bold. They wanted to see this next frontier, which is here now, here in the U.S., but we knew that we couldn't do it ourselves. We knew we needed to kind of have a trusted local partner, and all that local partner being from this country can deliver. And so we can talk about a lot of issues as Carrie just said, but we obviously work within the constraints of the Jones Act. Some people don't like that. Some people love it. But it is our reality, right? So instead of fighting and complaining, how do we adapt? And we really adapt with FOSS. You saw the barges, you saw the tugs, in partnership with FOSS, DEME, and all their brilliant engineering and nautical expertise, along with the DEME experience. We basically had to invent a new system. Otherwise, we would have waited another decade to build this first project. We had to figure out how could we get those components out to a vessel that not only couldn't really, it was so large it couldn't really come into the harbor, but it also is, because of the Jones Act, couldn't come in and out anyway. So we had to invent a new system, and FOSS was our partner to do that in order to basically feed the mothership, the sea installer, which is doing the install of the wind turbines. So it's really that partnership, that relationship that we've created. We're just one example, but this is happening, I think, throughout the industry. There is a little bit of turbulence. This is not for the faint of heart, unfortunately. It should be easier. As an American, I'm somewhat disappointed that we haven't stepped up more in order to make it easy. But I think we're getting there, and hopefully with winds at our back, we continue to make progress.
Well, yes, I have to say, I promise not to be too critical of the Jones Act in public, but of course, as a European looking at it, you think, yeah, not my favorite piece of American legislation. But I mean, maybe the experience shows that, well, yeah, maybe it's time to retire. No, sorry, I forget. In the US, no one ever retires. But anyway, maybe I leave the idea perhaps for the what might be if there are any concrete suggestions for what else might be done to make things work even better within the framework of what is possible in terms of your cooperation. But maybe turn to the consumer, the grid, who obviously takes the product, the energy which is flowing from the turbines already. And again, the same question, obviously, are there any aspects on which a more transatlantic exchange of information, of experience, of knowledge could be useful? Are there any areas where it might make sense to put regulators together to share experience? I mean, what is your sense on that front?
Thank you, Peter. And I'd like to say hello, Steve Boyle. I work for WindGrid USA, and WindGrid is a division of the Elia Group, the Belgian transmission system operator. And they also own 50 Hertz, which runs a large part of the German grid. And from Elia, I'd like to say thank you to Gilles and the Belgian Embassy, and to my colleague Bernard de Klerk, who runs EU affairs at Elia. I work with a multinational group, and to dovetail with the message of bringing European knowledge and transcending the initial issues that Europe had, we are looking. Elia Group is an expert in HVDC, which is where a lot of the transmission connecting offshore wind is going, because it uses less cable, it has less losses for long transmission distances. So we are working, and one of the issues, and I'll talk about what Kerry said about the interconnection, and that has been one of the challenges for European companies. And it's basically a function of the difference in how the US and Europe works. In Europe, if you win an offshore wind tender, you work with the utility and you go in the offices and you guys sit down. But in the US, the generation contracts come from states, and those states have no pull with the federally regulated transmission grids, RTOs, regional transmission organizations. So every state project goes in to be studied just like any other project. It has no additional status. So it has to wait and go through the same process. And originally, some of the European companies didn't understand that. It took a while to come up to speed. and there's no control. And one of the challenges is the U.S. process was set up for the interconnection of large combined cycle gas plants. A few of them a year, not 100 projects that are smaller, which the renewable solar and wind projects are. So the U.S. has had to restructure their interconnection processes, which they're doing, and European companies have had to kind of add that element to their decision-making process. How does the U.S. work? So the good news is that the grids are having to look at offshore wind. They need those megawatts. They're going to run short. Fossil fuel plants are coming offline. So necessity is the mother of invention. So the grids will be looking, we have to look at our processes. And I worked for the largest grid in the U.S. for 10 years. From the inside, I understand how they think. They look at their role as keeping the lights on, not necessarily being easy to deal with when you're trying to interconnect a project. So that has been a challenge. But offshore wind is coming, and we can talk about the challenges. Carrie and I were talking about trying to build transmission. There's no transition without transmission, and the U.S. needs some work in that policy, which comes down to cost allocation ultimately. It's not a concept that's different in Europe, I'm sure, than the U.S. Who pays for it? That is a big hurdle. And the policies in certain states, if they cause transmission to be built in other states, those states don't want to pay for it. So how do you get around that? New Jersey took a bold step where they went to their grid and said, please study. We want to put in 4,600 megawatts of offshore wind at this particular spot. Tell us what we need. So the upgrades were done, were evaluated by the proper utilities. There were some upgrades outside of New Jersey, and New Jersey said, we'll pay for them. So they, in essence, bypassed the federal challenges in cost allocation. So those types of moves are happening, and that's a good thing. So that's a lot, but things are happening positively, and the communication is happening. And I'd just like to say, my group at ILIA, we get together every 3 months in person, and our groups from around the world. So that's an invaluable time to learn from each other, learn the differences in what happens in Europe versus the United States. And we've become an incredibly strong team, and I've learned a ton about how European energy policy.
Okay, what do you think American regulators need to learn more about European energy policy?
I think...
or perhaps state level. I mean, maybe is the message that European regulators or European policy people should engage not just at the federal level in Washington, but also in state level?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, one of the bright spots, and I'm an optimist by birth, I think whether you're a Republican or a Democrat in the U.S., because of the load in AI and the dramatic increase of electricity that is being forecasted use, that both sides, whether you're talking about net zero or fossil generation, transmission is needed. So we need some type of federal regulation that kind of takes some from each party to build transmission and to give more power to the federal government to backstop states for interstate transmission that for some reason can't get all the states that it goes through their approval. So I think there's some potential for reliability concerns to push transmission legislation nationally that benefits our industry.
Okay. Yes, please.
Maybe 2 additional things just to be constructive is I'd also think it could be helpful for state and federal regulators in the U.S., and I'm talking specifically about the energy aspect, not other people can speak to shipping or fisheries and things, to talk about the construct of solicitations and how we solicit and contract for the output of the generation we're making. So here at the project you saw today, that's already contracted. That's fantastic. It's great. That means we have an offtake agreement and a line of sight or future revenue, right? We know what our revenue is going to be. But there are challenges with the way our solicitations are structured here in the U.S., and I think we do have some lessons we can learn from Europe on how we mitigate risk in those contracts for developers and for our ratepayers. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, but that's another area where I think there, I don't want to say lessons to be learned, but maybe more dialogue about what has worked there and hasn't, and what we're finding doesn't work here, particularly as it relates to supply chain and cost adjustments and things like that. And then, shoot, I had a great third thing, and now I can't remember what it was on top of yours. Now I'll stop there, but definitely on that perspective. And if I think of the other one, I'll come back to it.
Okay. No, I think in a way so therefore there's the sort of the energy policy regulatory experience. Maybe I look to the left again, and maybe on the more business-oriented experience, the equipment that you need. Is it all? Can it all be made in the United States, or basically you need an international supply chain? And then if you need an international supply chain, then of course we in Europe would say we should be front of the line in terms of quality and reliability and resilience of a supply chain. Where is it going? Because basically, this is the beginning of the rollout of offshore wind in the US, and okay, it's going to be expanding. Is it going to be an industry which relies on international collaborations? Because at the moment, these two are basically working in tandem to install the offshore. Is there a substitution that's going to happen? Is there a burden sharing that can happen?
I do want them to speak, but maybe just 2 sentences. We absolutely need local economic development and for some of our resources to come from the U.S. and from the states that are doing these solicitations. We also absolutely need international companies here providing vessels and all sorts of technologies and supply chain. They're not mutually exclusive. They can't be. We will never meet our climate goals. I don't know if anyone's from the media here. Maybe I'll get in trouble. But, we will never meet our climate goals without working together. There's just...
You have the New Bedford light here.
There we go. Okay. So I just think they're not mutually exclusive. We can work together. We are, and we have to continue to do that. And yes, we do need U.S. development of the supply chain. But we can't get there alone, and we're a long way from having a fully built-out supply chain anyway. And we have climate goals that need to be met in the next 5, 7, 10, and 15 years. So we have to work together.
So I'll speak as the one pure U.S. company up here, and I think Carrie is absolutely right. When we think of offshore wind, we only think of the components. We think of the blades, we think of the turbines, we think of rolling the transition pieces and monopiles, but that's such a small piece of the overall supply chain for offshore wind. And there's a great story that a developer tells about a concrete manufacturer who happens to be in New York, but through one of the trade associations, through something like the New Bedford Ocean Cluster, was paired up with a European company who makes mattresses. And that European company and this New York company got to know each other, formed a relationship, formed a partnership, shared the technology, and now the mattresses are being manufactured out of the United States. That means a workforce was trained. A European company shared knowledge and information and also received payment and generated a new consulting business line for those services that it provided. And that story should be repeated. And sometimes it should be the European company that comes over and opens a shop up here, hires U.S. workers, and has a U.S. workforce that they train and develop. And sometimes information should be shared. And by the way, as Europe is growing its offshore wind industry and we build a knowledge base, the information flow and the workforce development should flow both ways, right? The US can't claim it all, Europe can't claim it all, but there's so much work here to go around that to create a supply chain that is reliable for the Atlantic Ocean, the companies do need to partner. And one thing I would ask from all of the EU delegates is to think about the industries in your countries that can reach out to the compatible industries, and maybe it's not an exact match, that are in the US and start forming those relationships. How do we create that conversation? Can you, in your role, facilitate that conversation using companies, nonprofits like the Ocean Cluster, the economic development authorities, state-level officials? It doesn't all need to be done at the federal level. Quite a bit of workforce development and businesses that can be in the offshore wind supply chain only function at the state level. They're not tier ones. They're not even tier twos like FOSS. They're tier threes, tier fours, and tier 5 companies. They're companies that may be $50 million a year or $200 million a year in revenue, and they're not very big. They can't go to the developer and solicit business directly from the developer, but they can solicit it down the supply chain. The nuts, the bolts, the widgets, all of those things can be done, and then the white-collar jobs. Tony Appleton from Burns and McDonnell loves to say we have a shortage of civil engineers here. You know, how can we train up that workforce as well? So there's a variety of jobs. There are union jobs, there are desk jobs, and we really do need to work together to create a supply chain where we can feed all phases of the wind farm, not just construction, but also all of the complex permitting, the environmental studies, the O&M phase, and then decommissioning or repowering.
Very good. And maybe just to kind of keep it going. So DEME we're obviously in the midst of building the Vineyard project. We're down in Virginia off the coast building a Dominion project. Did I just say Dominion? Did I misspeak? Anyways, Vineyard here, Dominion down in Virginia. But we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars here in the U.S. on U.S. companies throughout the supply chain, a lot of it designated to U.S. vessels that are part of the support system. But I just maybe want to take a step back and just, you know, say the P word, which is protectionism. And I think, interestingly, the dynamics in the United States have changed, I would say, over the last decade, maybe decade plus. COVID had something to do with that. But the parties have changed a little bit. It used to be the Democrats were a little bit more kind of protectionist and, you know, wanting to kind of keep it tight and make it local. And the Republican Party was the party of free trade at all cost, you know, almost blindly. And there was always this kind of mix, a dynamic in this country. And to the Europeans that might be new in this in this country, that obviously you've probably seen has kind of flipped around a little bit. And that's a bit worrisome, I think, actually, because, I mean, back to Kerry, I mean, what you said, we need, it can't be either or. There's got to be a bit of a mix. I mean, I think there's got to be some you know, belief that, yeah, governments are going to tip the scale a little bit here and there, but when they go overboard, and I think there's dangers, as you may know, in the Congress right now, it could easily have the impact of actually curtailing the development of offshore wind. I mean, if we go hard on solar panels in China, we are never going to make the progress that we need. I stole that line from I'm going to call you the ambassador from Ireland. But this is our reality. Globalization has kind of become a bad, dirty word, unfortunately, because a lot of Americans did get left out, and there was a sense that maybe, you know, the elites on the coast were benefiting, but the that the middle-class folks who didn't have that high skill when our economy changed. So there's that reality that I think politicians are reacting to and recognizing that we need to have some balance in our trade policies. I'm sure Europe has the same issues, but I think that's what we are struggling as a country right now, that balance. And I think, we need to all figure that out together because there's dangers in going too hard on either side.
Well, certainly as a European, I'd say that, the fear of being left behind in the green transition is also an element of the political debate on our side of the Atlantic. But I think the message I take from what you say is basically between across the Atlantic, we have very like-minded partners with very similar values. And we have scope basically to build on and develop mutually beneficial two-way trade and investment. And that basically is, if you like, the agenda which we advocate in DC, and are happy basically to hear the same message coming when we talk to you here and hear it expressed in your experience. Obviously, the political climate is something which we as individually may have to, as foreign diplomats are more observers than participants in. But okay, the message that I take is basically we need to be looking and also showcasing and demonstrating the benefits which trade and investment are bringing. I looked at this slide because I'm conscious we need to wrap up, and I hope the panelists will stay a bit longer, so you can basically buttonhole them outside. More food and drink after. Exactly. Now Jen is reminding us that I'm keeping you from food and drink, so it's I'll become even less popular. But there will be the opportunity, hopefully, to buttonhole people and engage directly outside, because I think you've also passed some messages to my colleagues from the member states about some of the activities which they could be working on. But maybe I look to the two of you just for a last thought before we close.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. The one thing I would say is, from my perspective with the offshore wind industry, I would say the states present an opportunity that is separate from the federal government. No matter what happens at the federal level, states are the engine right now for offshore wind. And one element of that for Europeans to understand is each state is very different. There was a Speaker of the House from this state, Massachusetts, who said all politics is local, Tip O'Neill. And I think being involved with projects in different states, each state has different decision makers, a different process, a different way of getting things done. And I think as companies come into the US, they need to understand that, embrace that, and go with the flow with each state. And with that, the states, if you look at before President Biden's term, a lot of the states along the coast expedited their offshore wind. When the federal government wasn't supporting offshore wind, the states doubled their efforts. So I think that is kind of a hedge in the U.S. against some of the national uncertainty.
Carrie, I give the last word to Carrie, since we're only here because of vineyards. So.
Oh, right. Well, I can't take credit for that, but I'm in agreement completely with Steve. But I think because I'm sitting in New Bedford and because I'm sitting in front of the mayor, I have to say, also at the local level, and I'll give you an example, which New Bedford has been very gracious in the port and accommodating so many delegations. It is extremely helpful, and I'll give you a U.S. example. We also have a lease area in Humboldt, which is in Northern California. It's new in development, it's early stage. We have brought a delegation here twice now at the state level and the local level to meet with local officials and tour the port, tour the site. It's amazing when people come and they interact with people that have done this already, either politicians or elected officials or just workers, what they walk away with and understanding both the complexity but also the opportunity. And so to the extent that I understand you are at the diplomatic level at the EU, but getting your local folks here to interact, your cities. Cuxhaven, I visited Cuxhaven myself. I thought it was great. It was great for me. But doing the opposite at that level can be extremely useful as well. So, because yes, the business exchange is extremely important, and we didn't even talk about R&D. I used to run an R&D consortium that worked with Europe. That's really important. But this piece of it too is what's the experience? How do you go about making it happen? And then what's the investment look like? I think that's just critical at the state level. But the local experience is phenomenal. In the cities and towns that are experiencing, I don't know what you call it, rejuvenation because of this opportunity, are very similar. I find very similar. I used to live in Europe. Cities and towns that have been forgotten or haven't been able to take advantage of growth opportunities in some instances. New Bedford's a great example. So, places like Humboldt, which used to be a massive forestry processing community. There are a lot of similarities in the experience, and I stress exchanging. I think an exchange along those lines is equally as important and helpful. So.
Okay, well, let's that be the message, the importance of networking and engagement at local level or sub-national level alongside that we do in Washington. So I think we wrap up now. I mean, as I say, we can continue the conversation in more depth outside. We only really scraped the surface of some of the issues, but I think it was very interesting and illuminating discussion. And I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking the four panelists for their insights and contribution. And let's continue the conversation outside. It sounds like a threat. Let's say that again. Let's continue the conversation over a glass of wine and something to eat.